What's going on, guys? Welcome back to the channel. I'm Titus, and in today's video we're going to answer the burning question on everybody's mind: what the fuck is wool at the gates? So this game released out onto Steam Early Access about a month ago. I picked it up, but then we've been a bit busy lately with life stuff and all that, so finally got the video out a day late and $1 short, but hopefully you guys will enjoy it. This game is basically, it kind of is self-described as a city builder tower defense game with some RTS aspects sprinkled in there for good luck. So let's get into it and answer the question: is it any good though? Is this game worth your time and or money? So starting off the game, it's actually pretty self-explanatory. Every time you start on one of these maps, your HQ is always going to go into the same place. And indeed, once you place down your HQ, you'll pick a hero. This is part of the RTS and is almost kind of reminiscent of a sort of, I suppose, maybe not a MOBA style character, sort of. You'll see when we get into it. So I'm going to pick Bone Bow because I've played with him quite a bit and I actually quite enjoy him. So as you can see here, now we get the city builder aspect. So unlike a game, say like SimCity or an RTS game like StarCraft, all of your building locations are predetermined, and indeed how many of these buildings you can have is also predetermined by the map. So what I will say is, in the early game, I like to focus on economy a little bit because the game is quite easy in the first couple waves. When it comes to defending your settlement, your hero basically can do all the damage themselves. Now, as you see here, this game also has a bit of a talent tree system, and essentially the way this works is whenever you build a building, as maybe you can see here after I pick my first talent, let's go with this. I want to try a make my character as OP as possible. So as you can see here, when I pick this, I get to choose between the different factions. And as you can see there, right over here, there is a sort of number out of a number, right? So you can see here for Orc, it's 11 out of 20. For Elf, it's 1 out of 10. Every time you build a building in that faction, you get a certain amount of points. And whenever you hit certain point breakthroughs, that's when you get to begin choosing talents. Now, every single one of the 3 factions has different talents. Their units are different. And this allows you quite a bit of customization and replayability in terms of trying out different builds by mix and matching different factions. And indeed, even running one faction, you may not run the same faction the same way twice, depending on what talents and I guess sort of build you're going for. And that's one thing that I think this game really has going for it as a really, really good strength is it seems very simplistic on the face value. And indeed, it is pretty simplistic. However, the depth of customization and mix and matching, I think, will give a lot of people hours and hours of replayability as they, try to, put together certain builds and the like. Now, as you can see here, we've spent all of our gold. So now really all there is to do is to go ahead and hit these cross swords button, and that will start our wave. Another nice thing about the game is these waves will always come from whatever direction they show you. And so you always kind of have the round previous to wrap up, because indeed the enemies will always come from this area, right? So it shows you where they're going to come from. And so specifically when you're building towers and walls, which I'll build a little bit later on, you don't have to run into this problem of, okay, I put a wall here, but now all the enemies are spawning over here, effectively wasting all of the money that I spent on the walls. If you're going to buy a wall, you can wait to buy it until there's a wave that actually is coming from the direction the wall is. And the same goes for towers and all that other stuff. So that's quite nice. So let's go ahead and hit this button and get started. Your hero in the beginning is quite strong. Like I said, I've noticed that at least in the first wave or so, your hero can pretty much do a fairly good job on their own of just killing off these waves by themselves, even if, as you can see right here, sometimes it takes a little bit longer. Also, enemies do not seem very keen most of the time to actually sit and fight with your hero, and indeed are just going to try to beeline it for your vulnerable structures. However, as you can see there, we absolutely crushed them. So now we've got this first wave down. Let's go ahead and build ourselves our first group of units. So much like with anything else, there is there's a couple of units for each faction. Each one has 4. I have most of them unlocked for the human and the elves. I actually have all of them unlocked. Whereas with the orcs, I haven't yet. Now, my first criticism of the game would come just in the fact that I think some of these units are not all that well balanced. But of course, that can always change. As it stands right now, certain units, for instance, the orcs are kind of weird because you would think that they would be very infantry kind of ground unit focused. But in my opinion, they actually have some of the weakest units. And what I mean by that is, I'm not going to build this, but the orcs have brutes. These are supposed to be good against siege enemies, which you'll see a little bit later on. The revenants are not bad. They explode when they die, and then they summon a skeleton to continue fighting. So you're essentially getting, I would say, about 1 3/4 of an extra unit per head count. The shamans do this thing where they curse enemies with their range attacks, causing them to take more damage, but they don't seem to, as you can see on the right hand side, they have all of the units abilities, kind of, you know, how much health they have, how much damage they deal. And as you can see, compared to some of their contemporaries for ranged units in other factions, they're not really, I don't know. The orcs feel very weak as a infantry faction. However, that might be more of a preconceived notion of what I believe orcs are. You know, orcs in most media, they're very much they're very much infantry based, right? They're warriors. They fight on the front lines, stuff like that. Maybe this game has a different idea for orcs, so maybe that could just be me inserting preconceived biases where they perhaps don't belong. Outside of that, we've also got a couple of other monuments. We've got these shrines. These will refund a gold to you, and they will also give you experience. Now, these are really good if you are doing a build that is focusing on your hero, which is what I'm going to try and put together for this video. So let's go ahead and grab a couple of shrines. And let's go ahead and grab... You also have a couple of different settlement types when it comes to generating gold. For instance, this guild bank will pay out 15 gold if it survives for 3 rounds. These lumber mills will give you 4 gold per round and then 1 per round after 3 rounds, right? So they'll inject a bunch of gold into your economy in the beginning, and then after that, not so much. Whereas with the banks, they'll give you a massive lump sum in 3 rounds, but you have to keep the building alive, right? And much of this game is designed around the idea that a lot of your structures will get destroyed from time to time. As long as your HQ doesn't get destroyed, you are golden. So let's go ahead and construct a couple more houses for economy. And of course, now that we hit that 20 point mark, we get to pick our second talent. And now the question is, what do we want? Well, I think for this playthrough, maybe what we'll do, because we're going to try and spam out buildings, maybe gaining 3 for every 5 new buildings just kind of keeps our economy, you know, resupplying itself with gold as I aggressively expand, right? There is also maybe the idea that I could build tall HQs and all the buildings can be upgraded from 1 to 3 levels. So there is an idea maybe that you could try to build tall as opposed to wide, but that's not what I'm doing. I'm going to go wide, baby. So we've spent all of our gold. We've set our soldiers down over here in this choke point. Another minor gripe that I have about the AI is that, as you can see here, if I right click, I can place units, but if I hold right click, it will place them and they won't move. Now, the issue with this is that enemies, of course, have no concern with trying to kill everything in front of them before moving on. They will blitz past your units to try to destroy different buildings and such. And these, when you set them down like this, your troops are more than happy to just allow the enemy to walk by them. I think, personally, for me, what I'd like to see is maybe when an enemy unit runs by them, it aggroes them in a sort of like, I suppose, a World War or World of Warcraft fashion, where they'll chase them down, and then once they kill them, they will come back to the spot that they were assigned to. But I mean, perhaps maybe that's where the RTS aspect comes in, and maybe the developer, in fact, wants you to have to micro a little bit, which is fine. It's just not my... I do have to come clean and say that I am not a huge fan of RTSs or tower defense games. And you may be wondering, well, Titus, why are you even covering this game then? And the answer to that question would be, well, I think it's important as I try to become a better reviewer, critic, whatever you want to call this, that I tried to at least be unbiased and cover games that are outside of my wheelhouse, because, you know, there are tons of really good games that come out that are in my wheelhouse, and I could allow other people to cover them, but I think it helps me grow as a person, you know, trying to cover multiple things. So now we've leveled up, we can go ahead and choose another ability. Now, every single one of these is pretty interesting, except what I will say is Sanctuary, something maybe the developers want to look into. Sanctuary, it says it creates a dome that enemies cannot enter. And indeed, that is true. However, unfortunately, when you place the dome, because of that, it pushes enemies, and it can absolutely clip them through walls and things of that nature. Now, if that is how it's supposed to work, then I suppose no harm there, but maybe it's not, right? So just a bit of a side note, but all of these seem to be fairly interesting abilities. I'm actually going to go for a summon, because as an archer type hero, I think it'd be interesting to be able to essentially create my own frontline. So we'll make this monument. This just gives us 10 faction points. And I believe that there is some interaction with the buildings around, or it gives us faction points based on the buildings around it. So as you can see here, this is giving us 10. If I construct this, it's still giving us, it's still giving us 10. That's weird. I thought the monuments scaled based on what was around them. Perhaps I was wrong. Weird. All right. Anyway, we've got our first siege demolition type unit, the Toro, because the cows have joined the sheep in the uprising against the farmers. So this one, we're actually going to place down let's go ahead and place down a wall, and we'll actually also place down a turret. We'll go ahead and place these. And of course, as you can see here, every single faction has its own different type of towers. So elves have a poison tower. They also have a tower that gives invisibility to the structures around it. And the orcs have... Now, interestingly enough, the orcs have towers that you might not expect from their faction, because they have one, the All-Seeing, which is funny. I'm pretty sure it's Lord of the Rings reference. This tower can hit enemies regardless of where they are on the map. They also are the only faction that has a tower that essentially taunts nearby enemies, forcing them to attack it. And then they have a basic arrow tower that will cloak itself if it begins taking damage. Now, which of these do we want? Let's go ahead and take the... Actually, that does bring up an interesting question. You know what? Let's go ahead and build a couple more shrines instead. And the reason I'm doing this is because Let's go ahead and throw our melee units out front. It is better, in my opinion, to not leave any gold you don't spend that round. You could bank for the next round, but especially in the early game, I think it's better to just use all of your gold if possible. So we'll place that down. And now, as you can see, we've got a ton of experience. We're getting a ton of experience generated for us. We're getting a good amount of gold each round. And later on, we will build more walls and more turrets to help us. So let's go ahead and throw this around, or this wave. As you can see, now we've summoned some helpers, but these Toro, they don't really give a care. They don't give a rat's ass about us. They will absolutely sprint right by us to try to get to the walls as fast as possible. And like I said, this is one of the minor gripes I have when it comes to, if I had set that melee unit a little bit further out, as soon as those Toro ran past them, they would have just thrown their hands up and said, you know what, we don't get paid enough to have to deal with this malarkey. And that's a bit of a bummer. So we have enemies coming from this direction. Let's go ahead and pick them up. Let's go ahead and throw a wall in their way. And now we'll grab a couple more, I think maybe one more infantry unit. Now, side note about the infantry units, some of these, I will say, certain factions just have better units, in my opinion. For the elves, the Oathbinders that summon melee units at the start of combat, they're pretty good. The crossbowmen can pump out a ton of damage. The necromancers are really good in melee because when they kill an enemy, they resurrect it as a skeleton, and this can actually go on ad nauseum. So yeah, they're very strong. And I'll be honest, I find that the orc infantry is a little weak. I mean, even the brutes, right? I didn't have brutes in that last one. Let's go ahead and pick our tier 2 talent before we continue on. Temples, primary ability, cooldowns reduced, and basic attack speed by 20%. Well, we are talking about doing a hero focused build, so let's go ahead and pick that up. We also get to pick our last ability. Fire, killing a target reduces your hero's primary ability cooldown. Yeah, let's go ahead and do that, right? We'll kill enemies, we'll spam our E, and we'll just, in general, have a ton of fun. So, orc infantry seems very weak. The shamans do an ability where they cause enemies to take increased damage, but it never seems to make a huge difference that I've noticed. These brutes are supposed to be really good against those Toro type enemies. And once again, they don't seem to really deal enough extra damage to be in terms of choosing them over something like, say, the Revenant, which is a pretty solid orc unit because it does the tar pit thing. If you've ever played Total War, you'll know what I mean, where they take up space and they hold people in that space, right? They do a really good job of that, and that's why they're fairly serviceable. But some of the orc infantry, I think, could really use a buff, if I'm just being completely honest here with you guys. So, all right, we got 5 gold. That'll let us buy our first tower without having to worry about it. Now, I actually do quite like the all-seeing towers. They're not terribly strong in terms of their fire rate, and, you know, the missile has to travel a while. They do a lot of damage when the missile hits, but they don't seem to pump out as much effective damage as, say, some of the other towers from other factions. But I do like the fact that they can hit anywhere on the map. There's no range cap for them, so I do quite like that. All right, that refunded us 3 gold, as we actually probably should have tried to remember. So let's go ahead and throw up another, let's just go ahead and throw up another shrine, shall we? So now our hero's getting a ton of experience, and that is really nice because, generally speaking, through most of my playthroughs, I haven't focused a whole ton on the hero themselves. So I really do want to see what they're capable of when, you know, and it actually seems like man, maybe this is the way. Maybe the problem I've had, because the game did seem to get quite difficult later on in some of the other stages, but maybe the problem is that I just wasn't putting enough attention into my hero, because my hero that round absolutely annihilated those guys. So another nice part, I didn't mention it as it happened because I was already monologuing about something else, but then one nice thing about this as well with the infantry, your little units down here, is there is times throughout the battle you can just hit Q and everyone who's died previously will be respawned. So that's always nice, right? I haven't been able to really figure out whether or not that's at set intervals or after a certain amount of waves are killed, or however, or a certain amount of your own troops die. But keep an eye out for it. Every once in a while, hit Q, you will get all of your guys back. And now it seems like down here, there's an amount of times, but I have seen this not quite 2 of 2, if that makes sense. During some combats, I've only been able to use it once. So I'm not sure if maybe I just wasn't paying attention to this, or if maybe the number is not fully reflective of the actual amount of times you get to use this. But we're going to get into my least favorite aspect of the game, the flyers. Now, of course, I understand that you need the flyers so that there isn't a constant predictable path you can kind of force enemies to run through. However, one thing I really dislike about the dragons is they will come in and a lot of times they'll spread out and they will just absolutely go for, it's really hard to have perfect coverage for the dragons in a sense of, you know, trying to avoid anything getting destroyed, right? That certain, I guess that certain kind of perfectionist mindset that we all like to have sometimes, where I don't want a single thing destroyed, but they absolutely do not care about what I want. So we're going to go ahead and throw down this tower. This tower is the taunt tower, although again, as I've noticed, it either can only taunt a certain amount of people, and it doesn't seem to specify. But yeah, some people will not be taunted by this. They'll fly off. They'll go destroy undefended things. Of course, that's always a bit annoying, but such is the way of things. Now, let's go ahead and throw down, you know what, let's throw down a lumber mill. And let's get a lot of that extra goody goodness. Maybe a couple more shrines. What do we got here? Monuments gain 400% more health. The cost increase for building the same type of barracks or tower multiple times. As you saw there, the more you build of the same thing, the more expensive it gets. This would allow me to bypass some of that. Temples are hidden from enemies until every other nearby building has been destroyed. Temples also provide an additional 2 gold. Well, we have been putting a lot into temples, so maybe we pick this up, actually. And then from there, let's go ahead and grab ourselves a shadow tower, because if they do, this will make the temples invisible. And then we'll go ahead and throw down another house for some economy. Now, let's see. We've got 25 enemies coming from that direction and 10 enemies coming from this direction. So as you can see, I've basically shown you guys exactly what you can expect from this game. And the real question is it fun? Well, I've actually been enjoying it a little bit, but I will say, for me, as someone who doesn't love tower defense games, I will say that I don't think that this game is doing anything to really bring people over or try and change people's minds. What I mean by that is, if you didn't already enjoy tower defense games, or if you're like me and you kind of really dislike tower defense games usually, this game isn't really doing enough, in my opinion, to sell people further on the idea of tower defense games. It's one of those things where, for the crowd of people, let's see, let's go with lifesteal. For the people who love these kinds of games, you are absolutely going to enjoy this game a ton. There's absolutely no question about it in my mind. You are absolutely going to enjoy this game. if you are the kind of person who is even a little bit lukewarm on tower defense games, you've played a couple, you don't hate them, you don't love them, but you don't avoid them, you still will probably find a ton of value in a game like this, because as stands right now, it's only $7 on early access. Of course, the devs have stated that they will increase the price further upon release, but at least as it stands now, you are getting a quite a good game, even as is, for $7. I just think for someone like me and others, it may not really be selling you on tower defense games. You know, it's a fun, enjoyable game. You will get quite a bit of time invested out of it because of the real, I guess, the real meat and potatoes of this game is that you have so many options. Okay. You have so many options. As you can see here, this tower absolutely fell. And now we're going to start losing stuff. We'll go ahead and hit Q. Hopefully we can bring some people in to stem the bleeding, because it is getting out of control, which can be a little unfortunate. The game is just not doing enough for me as someone who doesn't really like tower defense games, but you are getting a lot out of it because of the idea that while it is very simplistic on its face, there is a lot happening with the way you can mix and match factions and do different builds. You can build your hero in different ways. You can build different units. You can decide different build orders from buildings. And again, every single building will have 3 different factions. There's different talents you can choose. There's a lot of, in almost sort of a roguelite fashion, there is a lot of replayability for trying new things. However, for me, like I said, after putting in about 6 hours into the game, I think I've pretty much played as much of it as I want to, if I'm being completely real. That is no slight at the developer. It's just I've never been crazy about tower defense games. I'm not super huge on city builders either. Although I do enjoy things like SimCity from time to time as just a sort of way to, you know, build whatever monstrosity I can of civil engineering. So, in my final regard, I'd say that if you enjoy tower defense games at all, I think you should probably head over to Steam and go ahead and pick up this game. I don't think it is a bad idea. I don't think it'd be a bad purchase at all. I don't think that you would regret it. However, if you dislike tower defense games, this one is not tempting you to change your mind. Personally, that's just kind of how I think about it. So anyway, guys, that's been all for me. I've been Titus. I hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, like, comment, subscribe, all that fancy YouTube stuff, because it really does help the channel. It helps me, and you know, even other content creators you might watch. It just lets us know what you're interested in, whether or not you enjoy these types of videos, or maybe we need to look for other things to, you know, draw you in. Also, we are still streaming every Friday, Saturday here on YouTube from 7 Pacific Standard Time to usually about 1 or 2 in the morning. We only got 2 days of real streaming, and so we're trying to get the most out of those days as we can. However, we're also trying to dip our toes into Twitch here and there, you know, diversify the portfolio and all that jazz. I guess we'll have to wait and see. But anyway, guys, that's enough yapping for me. I appreciate y'all kicking it with me. I have nothing else to say. And so until next time, I'll see you.